Hi, I'm Scott Wolf, and I worked with Disney legend Bob Gurr to bring you this video about some unique and unusual projects he worked on, sometimes as a result of Disneyland mishaps, and I'll share some stories that even the staunchest of Disney experts may not know. Bob Gurr started working for Disney in 1954, and his first assignment was to design the Autopia cars for Disneyland. But he went on to design and build nearly all the transportation. A few examples are the cars and buses on Main Street, the Doom Buggies of the Haunted Mansion, the boats of It's a Small World and Pirates of the Caribbean, the racing vehicles of Space Mountain and the Matterhorn, the Viewliner, Flying Saucers, Peoplemover, Monorail, and even Disneyland's first parking lot tram. It's no wonder he was bestowed Disneyland's highest honor, his name on a window on Main Street. Although Bob was Walt Disney's go-to guy for vehicles, he often put Bob's expertise to use on numerous other projects that were not related to transportation, simply because he knew that Bob was the best one for the job. I'm fascinated with these projects, many of which are quite unusual. For example, in 1960, Bob created the Fantasyland wave machine. Fantasyland used to house the life-size Chicken of the Sea pirate ship that guests could climb aboard and explore and have a meal on. Although set in a lagoon, the boat was stationary, and Walt wanted to give the appearance of the moving sea around the ship, and that's exactly what Bob's wave machine did. You can see how still the water looked in this photo from a 1957 souvenir guidebook. That gives you a clue into the type of detail that was so important to Walt. Another example is that back in 1955, when the park opened, there was the Kodak Camera Center Shop on Main Street. Inside the shop, guests could pose for and purchase photos with a turn of the 20th century backdrop. To keep the authentic historic feel, the modern camera was housed inside a prop vintage camera, complete with a little curtain that the photographer would duck beneath when taking photos. The problem was that the camera needed a camera stand, and Walt wanted to ensure that it looked authentic too. Despite the fact that this had nothing to do with vehicles or engineering, Bob was assigned to the task. Listen to what he told me about it.
And they had this big camera, really good camera, but then they said they need a stand, and camera stands that you buy today in 1955 are modern. So they said, well, we need a camera stand that's authentic, 1900. We can't find one. And they said, Gurr, can you make one? Yeah. So I went over to the library and I ratted around and I found a picture of what they, old portraits. They had fancy camera stands that are made out of wood. I think it was like a three-legged thing with casters. That was really cute, so I'm designing woodwork furniture.
That's amazing detail.
That's the essence of Walt Disney. Every detail is thought about and has to be as accurate as you can do it.
Another detail that Bob worked on in 1955 were the red and green signal lights for the Disneyland Railroad. You'd think for authenticity, Walt would have just wanted an actual signal light, but that presented a problem. You see, the Disneyland Railroad is scaled down, so a full-size signal light would look too large. Therefore, Bob had to create one the same scale as the trains. Now, in 1967, as part of the new Tomorrowland, the Rocket to the Moon attraction had been updated with some new technologies, and it was renamed Flight to the Moon. In Flight to the Moon, guests would watch film above and below the theater, showing Earth below and the Moon above. But one aspect of the 1967 upgrade was they wanted it to feel more like a rocket. I'm going to let you hear what Bob told me about how they achieved that, and I'm also going to show you some photos I took of the theater. These photos are from when the Flight to the Moon had been rethemed to Mission to Mars. Since man had actually landed on the moon, this was more futuristic.
We wanted to redo that moon ride, and the art directors wanted to augment the feeling that you are launching. And so there was two aspects. If you have G-forces, and a pilot in an airplane, pulls the G-force, you're squashed into the seat. So that's a feeling that they wanted. And the other thing is, if you're around a very powerful rocket nozzle, the vibration in the air is extremely intense, and it just shakes the daylights out of anything. So that meant this seat is really, really simple. I designed a nice looking shape for the seat, which we made molded plastic, made a little frame for it, but then the seat bottom was on a hinge at the front, and it was sitting on a Firestone airbag, which is, you know, a truck part. You just go buy it. The idea was that when the people come into the theater, the airbags are energized. You know, it's just air tubes, so the seat is up, and even a heavy person won't depress it.
Right.
Then all the seats are mounted on a support frame that's connected to the building foundation. So it's on bigger airbags. Now this thing can float around a little bit like that. And then we had an electric motor with a counterweight that was out of balance. So when that part of the show started, and the big racket, the video you're seeing it, the whole building started to quiver and shake, but not the whole building. It was the seat frame. Your feet are quivering, the floor is shaking, and you're sinking down into the seat.
Yeah.
And it was so simple.
The Imagineers of those days were pioneering new technologies, using whatever resources they had at the time, which wasn't a lot by today's standards. So they often had to resort to parts that were created for other purposes, even if it was as simple as using truck airbags, like Bob said. But every time the final results were impressive. Despite how new and innovative Disneyland was in its infancy, so many bugs still needed to be worked out. That was certainly the case in Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Many of the dark rides were developed by Arrow Development, who did old-fashioned, simple dark rides for amusement parks, but they certainly didn't do the quality that Disney has become known for. I want you to hear Bob talk about this, and also how Mr. Toad's Wild Ride became a real wild ride for some guests.
Dark ride technology was old, corny, flat floor, spooky, ratty stuff. Walt wanted to build this glorious, perfect park. And how do you get there over time? It meant that the park opened with some pretty temporary looking mechanical junk.
Oh.
Yeah, but the public should never have known that it was like that.
Yeah.
But the toad gags, we call them gags, I think it's a gag, was always giving some kind of problem. And one day, Roger sends me to the park. He says, go down and see the maintenance guy. The falling barrels actually did fall. They fell on somebody. It was a stack of barrels, and as you drive along, the barrels are wiggling, and you drive along, the barrels fall over, but they have a gizmo that stops it before it hits your head. Well, the mechanism failed, and the whole tower of barrels fell on the guests.
Oh man.
Well, nobody really hurt, but
that's good.
Yeah. Well,
what an effect.
I came up with a design for that. And it's been there, you know, it ran forever after that. While I was down there, they says, oh, by the way, the headlight gag is an overhead thing, and it's just as ratty as the other thing. That could hurt if that fell on somebody. He says, why don't you come up with a better one of that? So I did that, because it's a traveling light. And then there was a whole bunch of other gags. I got one done. They said, oh, why don't you fix this one here? While you're still here, come up with a design for that one. So it was like our first wave of retrofit.
Yeah.
Junky stuff to get it up to a Disneyland standard.
It's amazing how kind of temporary Disneyland was to begin with.
You have no idea.
I'm learning a little.
I'm so grateful to Bob for sharing his wonderful stories with me and for working with me on this video, and I've got lots more to share with you. Please come back for part 2, where I'll share stories about the Jungle Cruise, Alice in Wonderland, Mine Train, and the Adventureland Frost Barge that Bob designed for Disneyland.